Chapter 2, What is Evil? That the Somras has been the greatest good of our age is pretty obvious, said Brahaspati. It has shaped our age. Hence, it is equally obvious that someday it will become the greatest evil. The key question is, when would the transformation occur? Shiva, Sati, Kali, and Ganesh were still in Brahaspati's classroom in Panchavati. Brahaspati had declared a holiday for the rest of the day so that their conversation could continue uninterrupted. The legendary 5 banyan trees, after which Panchavati had been named, were clearly visible from the classroom window. As far as I am concerned, the Somras was evil the moment it was invented, spat out Kali. Shiva frowned at Kali and turned to Brahaspati. Go on. Any great invention has both positive and negative effects. As long as the positive outweighs the negative, one can safely continue to use it. The Somras created our way of life and has allowed us to live longer in healthy bodies. It has enabled great men to keep contributing towards the welfare of society longer than was ever possible in the past. At first, the Somras was restricted to the Brahmins, who were expected to use the longer, healthier life, almost a second life, for the benefit of society at large. Shiva nodded. He had heard this story from Daksha many years ago. Later, Lord Ram decreed that the benefits of the Somras should be available to all. Why should Brahmins have special privileges? Thereafter, the Somras was administered to the entire populace, resulting in huge progress in society as a whole. I know all about this, said Shiva, but when did the negative effects start becoming obvious? The first sign was the Nagas, said Brahaspati. There have always been Nagas in India, but they were usually Brahmins. For example, Ravan, Lord Ram's greatest foe, was a Naga and a Brahmin. Ravan was a Brahmin? Asked a shocked Sati. Yes, he was, answered Kali, for every Naga knew his story. The son of the great sage Vishrava, he was a benevolent ruler, a brilliant scholar, a fierce warrior, and a staunch devotee of Lord Rudra. He had some faults, no doubt, but he wasn't evil personified, as the people of the Sapt Sindhu would have us believe. In that case, do you people think less of Lord Ram? Asked Sati. Of course not. Lord Ram was one of the greatest emperors ever. We worship him as the 7th Vishnu. His ideas, philosophies, and laws are the foundation of the Naga way of life. His reign, Ram Rajya, will always be celebrated across India as the perfect way to run an empire. But you should know that it is believed by some that even Lord Ram did not see Ravan as pure evil. He respected his enemy. Sometimes there can be good people on both sides of a war. Shiva raised his hand to silence them and turned his attention back towards the Meluhan chief scientist. Brahaspati. So the Nagas, though small in number initially, were usually Brahmins, Brahaspati continued. But then, the Somras was used only by the Brahmins until then. Today, the connection seems obvious, but it didn't seem so at the time. The Somras created the Nagas? Asked Shiva. Yes, this was discovered only a few centuries ago by the Nagas. I learned it from them. We didn't discover it, said Kali. The Vayuputra Council told us. The Vayuputra Council? Asked Shiva. Yes, continued Kali. The previous Mahadev, Lord Rudra, left behind a tribe called the Vayuputras. They lived beyond the western borders in a land called Pariha, the land of fairies. I know that, said Shiva, recalling one of his conversations with a Vasudev Pandit. But I hadn't heard of the council. Well, somebody needs to administer the tribe. And the Vayuputras are ruled by their council, which is headed by their chief, who is respected as a god. He is called Mitra. He is advised by the council of 6 wise people collectively called the Amartya Shpand. The council controls the twin mission of the Vayuputras. Firstly, to help the next Vishnu whenever he appears, and secondly, have one of the Vayuputras trained and ready to become the next Mahadev when the time comes. Shiva raised his eyebrows. You obviously broke that rule, Shiva, said Kali. I'm sure the Vayuputra Council must have been quite shocked when you appeared out of the blue, because, quite clearly, they did not create you. You mean this is a controlled process? I don't know, said Kali, but your friends will know a lot more. The Vasudevs? Yes. Shiva frowned, reached for Sati's hand, and then asked Kali, so how did you find out about the Somras creating the Nagas? Did the Vayuputras approach you? Or did you find them? I did not find them. The Naga king Vasuki was approached by them a few centuries ago. They suddenly appeared out of nowhere, lugging huge hoards of gold, and offered to pay us an annual compensation. King Vasuki, very rightly, refused to accept the compensation without an explanation. And? And he was told that the Nagas were born with deformities as a result of the Somras. The Somras randomly has this impact on a few babies when in the womb, if the parents have been consuming it for a long period. Not all babies? No. A vast majority of babies are born without deformities. But a few unfortunate ones, like me, are born Naga. Why? I call it dumb luck, said Kali. But King Vasuki believed that the deformities caused by the Somras were the Almighty's way of punishing those souls who had committed sins in their previous births. Therefore, he accepted the pathetic explanation of the Vayuputra Council along with their compensation. Mausi rejected the terms of the agreement with the Vayuputras the moment she ascended the throne, said Ganesh, referring to his aunt, Kali. Why? I'm sure the gold could have been put to good use by your people, exclaimed Shiva. Kali laughed coldly. That gold was a mere palliative. Not for us, but for the Vayuputras. Its only purpose was to make them feel less guilty for the carnage being wrought upon us by the great invention that they protected. Shiva nodded, understanding her anger. He turned to Brahaspati. But how exactly is the Somras responsible for this? Brahaspati explained. We used to believe the Somras blessed one with a long life by removing poisonous oxidants from one's body. But that is not the only way it works. Shiva and Sati leaned closer. It also operates at a more fundamental level. Our body is made up of millions of tiny living units called cells. These are the building blocks of life. Yes, I've heard of this from one of your scientists in Maluha, said Shiva. Then you'd know that these cells are the tiniest living beings. They combine to form organs, limbs, and in fact, the entire body. Right. These cells have the ability to divide and grow, and each division is like a fresh birth. One old unhealthy cell magically transforms into 2 new healthy cells. As long as they keep dividing, they remain healthy. So your journey begins in your mother's womb as a single cell. That cell keeps dividing and growing till it eventually forms your entire body. Yes, said Sati, who had learnt all of this in the Meluha Gurukul. Obviously, said Brahspati, this division and growth has to end sometime. Otherwise, one's body would keep growing continuously with pretty disastrous consequences. So the Almighty put a limit on the number of times a cell can divide. After that, the cell simply stops dividing further, and thus, in effect, becomes old and unhealthy. And do these old cells make one's body age and thus eventually die? Asked Shiva. Yes, every cell reaches its limit on the number of divisions at some point or the other. As more and more cells in the body hit that limit, one grows old and finally dies. Does the Somras remove this limit on division? Yes. Therefore, your cells keep dividing while remaining healthy. In most people, this continued division is regulated. But in a few, some cells lose control over their division process and keep growing at an exponential pace. This is cancer, isn't it? Asked Sati. Yes, said Brahaspati. This cancer can sometimes lead to a painful death. But there are times when these cells continue to grow and appear as deformities, like extra arms or a very long nose. How polite and scientific, said a livid Kali. But one cannot even begin to imagine the physical pain and torture that we undergo as children when these outgrowths occur. Sati stretched out and held her sister's hand. Nagas are born with small outgrowths, which don't seem like much initially, but are actually harbingers of years of torture, continued Kali. It almost feels like a demon has taken over your body, and he's bursting out from within, slowly, over many years, causing soul-crushing pain that becomes your constant companion. Our bodies get twisted beyond recognition, so that by adolescence, when further growth finally stops, we are stuck with what Brahaspati politely calls deformities. I call it the wages of sins that we didn't even commit. We pay for the sins others commit by consuming the Somras. Shiva looked at the Naga queen with a sad smile. Kali's anger was justified. And the Nagas have suffered this for centuries? Asked Shiva. Yes, said Brahaspati. As the number of people consuming the Somras grew, so did the number of Nagas. One will find that most of the Nagas are from Meluha, for that is where the Somras is used most extensively. And what is the Vayuputra Council's view on this? I'm not sure, but from whatever little I know, The Vayuputra Council apparently believes that the Somras continues to create good in most areas where it is used. The suffering of the Nagas is collateral damage and has to be tolerated for the larger good. Bullshit, snorted Kali. Shiva could appreciate Kali's rage, but he was also aware of the enormous benefits of Somras over several millennia. On balance, was it still good? He turned to Brahaspati. Are there any other reasons for believing that Somras is evil? Consider this. We Meluhans choose to believe that the Saraswati is dying because of some devious Chandravanshi conspiracy. This is not true. We are actually killing our mother river all by ourselves. We use massive amounts of Saraswati waters to manufacture the Somras. It helps stabilize the mixture during processing. It is also used to churn the crushed branches of the Sanjeevani tree. I have conducted many experiments to see if water from any other source can be used, but it just doesn't do the trick. Does it really require that much water? Yes, Shiva. When Somras was being made for just a few thousand, the amount of Saraswati water used didn't matter. But when we started mass-producing Somras for 8 million people, the dynamics changed. The water started getting depleted slowly by the giant manufacturing facility at Mount Mandar. The Saraswati has already stopped reaching the Western Sea. It now ends its journey in an inland delta, south of Rajasthan. The desertification of the land to the south of this delta is already complete. It's a matter of time before the entire river is completely destroyed. Can you imagine the impact on Meluha? On India? Saraswati is the mother of our entire Sap Sindhu civilization, said Sati, speaking of the land of the 7 rivers. Yes, even our preeminent scripture, the Rig Veda, sings paeans to the Saraswati. It is not only the cradle, but also the lifeblood of our civilization. What will happen to our future generations without this great river? The Vedic way of life itself is at risk. What we are doing is taking away the lifeblood of our future progeny so that our present generation can revel in the luxury of living for 200 years or more. Would it be so terrible if we lived for only 100 years instead? Shiva nodded. He could see the terrible side effects and the ecological destruction caused by the Somras, but he still couldn't see it as evil, an evil which left only one option, a Dharmayud, a holy war to destroy it. What else? Asked Shiva. The destruction of the Saraswati seems a small price to pay when compared to another, even more insidious impact of the Somras. Which is? The plague of Branga. The plague of Branga? Asked a surprised Shiva. What does that have to do with the Somras? Branga had been suffering continuous plagues for many years, which had killed innumerable people, especially children. The primary relief thus far had been the medicine procured from the Nagas, or else exotic medicines extracted after killing the sacred peacock, leading to the Brangas being ostracized even in peace-loving cities like Kashi. Everything, said Brahaspati. The Somras is not only difficult to manufacture, but it also generates large amounts of toxic waste, a problem we have never truly tackled. It cannot be disposed of on land because it can poison entire districts through groundwater contamination. It cannot be discharged into the sea. The Somras waste reacts with salt water to disintegrate in a dangerously rapid and explosive manner. A thought entered Shiva's mind. Did Brahaspati accompany me to Karachapa the first time to pick up seawater? Was that used to destroy Mount Mandar? Brahaspati continued. What seemed to work was fresh river water. When used to wash the Somras waste, over a period of several years, fresh water appeared to reduce its toxic strength. This was proven with some experiments at Mount Mandar. It seemed to work especially well with cold water. Ice was even better. Obviously, we could not use the rivers of India to wash the Somras waste in large quantities. We could have ended up poisoning our own people. Therefore, many decades ago, a plan was hatched to use the high mountain rivers in Tibet. They flow through uninhabited lands and their waters are almost ice cold. They would therefore work perfectly to clean out the Somras waste. There is a river high up in the Himalayas called Sangpo, where Meluha decided to set up a giant waste treatment facility. Are you telling me that the Meluhans have come to my land before? Yes, in secret. But how can such large consignments be hidden? You've seen the quantity of Somras powder required to feed an entire city for a year. 10 small pouches are all it takes. It is converted into the Somras drink at designated temples across Meluha when mixed with water and other ingredients. So even the waste amount is not huge? No, it isn't. It's a small quantity, making it easy to transport, but even that small quantity packs in a huge amount of poison. So this waste facility was set up in Tibet? Yes, it was established in a completely desolate area along the Sangpo. The river flowed east, so it would go to relatively unpopulated lands away from India. Therefore, our land would not suffer from the harmful effects of the Somras. Shiva frowned. But what about the lands farther ahead that the Tsangpo flowed into? The eastern lands that lie beyond Swadweep? What about the Tibetan land around Tsangpo itself? Wouldn't they have suffered due to the toxic waste? They may have, said Brahaspati, but that was considered acceptable collateral damage. The Meluhans kept track of the people living along the Sangpo. There were no outbreaks of disease, no sudden deformities. The icy river waters seemed to be working at keeping the toxins inactive. The Vayuputra Council was given these reports. Apparently, the council also sent scientists into the sparsely populated lands of Burma, which is to the east of Swadweep. It was believed that Sangpo flowed into those lands and became the main Burmese river, the Irrawaddy. Once again, there was no evidence of a sudden rise in diseases. Hence, it was concluded that we had found a way to rid ourselves of the Somras waste without harming anyone. When it was discovered that Sangpo means purifier in the local Tibetan tongue, it was considered a sign, a divine message. A solution had been found. This came down to the scientists of Mount Mandar as received wisdom as well. What does this have to do with the Brangas? Well, you see, the upper regions of the Brahmaputra have never been mapped properly. It was simply assumed that the river comes from the east, because it flows west into Branga. The Nagas, with the help of Parshuram, finally mapped the upper course of the Brahmaputra. It falls at almost calamitous speeds from the giant heights of the Himalayas into the plains of Branga through gorges that are sheer walls almost 2,000 meters high. 2,000 meters? Gasped Shiva. You can well imagine that it is almost impossible to navigate a river course such as the Brahmaputras, but Parshuram succeeded and led the Nagas along that path. Parshuram, of course, did not realize the significance of the discovery of the river's course. Queen Kali and Lord Ganesh did. Did you go up the Brahmaputra as well? Asked Shiva. Where does the river come from? Is it connected to the Sangpo in any way? Brahaspati smiled sadly. It is the Sangpo. What? The Sangpo flows east only for the duration of its course in Tibet. At the eastern extremities of the Himalayas, it takes a sharp turn, almost reversing its flow. It then starts moving southwest and crashes through massive gorges before emerging near Branga as the Brahmaputra. By the holy lake, said Shiva, the Brangas are being poisoned by the Somras waste. Exactly. The cold waters of the Tsangpo dilute the poisonous impact to a degree. However, as the river enters India in the form of the Brahmaputra, the rising temperature reactivates the dormant toxin in the water. Though the Branga children also suffer from the same body-racking pain as the Nagas, they are free from deformities. Sadly, Branga also has a high incidence of cancer. Being highly populous, the number of deaths is simply unacceptable. Shiva began to connect the dots. Devotas told me the Branga plague peaks during the summer every year. That is the time when ice melts faster in the Himalayas, making the poison flow out in larger quantities. Yes, said Brahaspati, that is exactly what happens. Obviously, since both the Nagas and Brangas are being poisoned by the same malevolence, our medicines work on the Brangas as well, Kali spoke up. So we send them our medicines to help ameliorate their suffering a little. Even though we told King Chandraketu how his kingdom was being poisoned, some Brangas prefer to believe that the plague strikes every year because of a curse that the Nagas have cast upon them. If only we were that powerful. But it appears that at least Chandraketu believes us. This is why he sends us men and gold regularly to stealthily attack Somra's manufacturing facilities, the root of all our problems. Evil should never be fought with subterfuge, Kali, said Shiva. It must be attacked openly. Kali was about to retort, but Shiva had turned back to Brahaspati. Why didn't you say something? Raise the issue in Meluha or with the Vayuputras? I did, said Brahaspati. I took up the matter with Emperor Daksha, but he doesn't really understand scientific things or involve himself with technical details. He turned to the one intellectual he trusts, the venerable royal priest, Rajguru Brigu. Lord Brigu seemed genuinely interested and took me to the Vayuputra Council so I could present my case before them, but they were not at all supportive. This was where the issue was effectively killed. Nobody was willing to believe me about the source of the Brahmaputra. They also laughed when they heard that I was ostensibly listening to the Nagas. According to them, the Nagas were now ruled by an extremist harridan whose frustration with her own karma made everyone else the object of her ire. "I'll take that as a compliment," said Kali. Shiva smiled at Kali before turning back to Brahaspati. "But how did the Vayuputras rationalize what's happening in Branga?" "According to them," said Brahaspati, "the Brangas were a rich but uncivilized lot, with strange eating habits and disgusting customs. So the plague could have been caused by their bad practices and karma rather than the Somras. Remember, there is little sympathy for the Brangas amongst the Vayuputras because it is well known that they drink the blood of peacocks, a bird that is held holy by any follower of Lord Rudra." "And you gave up?" retorted Shiva. "Shouldn't you have pressed on? Emperor Daksha is weak and can be easily influenced. He could have brought about changes in Meluha. The Vayuputra Council does not govern your country." "Well, there was a good reason for me to not persist with the argument." "What reason?" "Tara, the woman I intended to marry, suddenly went missing," continued Brahaspati. "The last time I saw her, she was in Pariha. On returning to Meluha, I received a letter from her telling me that she was disappointed with my tirades against the Somras. I asked Lord Brigu to check with his friends in Pariha. I was told that she had just disappeared." Shiva frowned. "I know it sounds lame," said Brahaspati, "but somewhere deep within, I do believe Tara was taken hostage. It was a message for me. Keep quiet or else." "And you gave up," Shiva repeated. "Why would you do that if you believed you were right?" "I didn't," continued Brahaspati defensively, "but by then I was losing credibility amongst the senior scientists of other realms. Had I made the issue any bigger within Meluha, I would have lost what little standing I have amongst the Suryavanshis as well. I would have lost my ability to do anything at all. Though I knew I had to do something, I also realized that the strategy of open lobbying and debate had become counterproductive. There were too many vested interests tied into the Somras. Only the Vayuputra Council could have had the moral strength to stop it openly through the institution of the Nilkanth. But they refused to believe that the Somras had turned evil. "What happened thereafter?" asked Shiva. "I opted for silence," said Brahaspati. "At least on the surface. But I had to do something. Maharishi Brigu was convinced there was nothing to fear from the Somras' waste. So the manufacturing of Somras continued at the same frantic pace. The Saraswati kept getting prodigiously consumed. Somras' waste was being generated in huge quantities. Since the empire now believed that cold, fresh water had worked in disposing of the toxic waste, new plans were being drawn up to use other rivers. This time, the idea was to use the upper reaches of either the Indus or the Ganga. "Lord Ram, be merciful," whispered Shiva. "Millions of lives would have been at risk. We were going to unleash toxic waste right through the heart of India. Almost as a message from the Paramatma, the ultimate soul, I was approached by Lord Ganesh around this time. He had formulated a plan, and I must admit his words made eminent sense. There could be only one possible solution: the destruction of Mount Mandar. Without Mount Mandar, there would be no Somras. And with the Somras gone, all these problems would disappear too." Shiva cast a quick look toward Sati. "Whatever little doubts I may have had," said Brahaspati, "disappeared when I was confronted with a new scenario. When it happened, I knew in my heart that it was time for the destruction of evil." "What new scenario?" asked Shiva. "You appeared on the scene," answered Brahaspati. "Even without the Vayuputra Council's permission, perhaps even without their knowledge. The Nilkanth appeared. It was the final sign for me. The time to destroy evil was upon us." Vishwadyumna quickly gave hand signals to his Branga soldiers. The hunting party went down on their knees. Kartik, who was right behind Vishwadyumna, whistled softly as his eyes lit up. "Magnificent!" Vishwadyumna turned towards Kartik. While most of Shiva's convoy was settling itself into the visitors' camp outside Panchavati, a few hunting parties had been sent out to gather meat for the large entourage. Kartik, having proved himself as an accomplished hunter throughout the journey to Panchavati, was the natural leader of one of the groups. Vishwadyumna had accompanied the son of the Nilkanth. He intensely admired the fierce warrior skills of Kartik. "It's a rhinoceros, my lord," said Vishwadyumna softly. The rhinoceros was a massive animal, nearly 4 meters in length. It had bumpy brownish skin that hung over its body in multiple layers, suggestive of tough armor. Its most distinctive feature was its nasal horn, which stuck out like a fearsome offensive weapon, to a height of nearly 50 centimeters. "I know," whispered Kartik. "They live around Kashi as well. They're nearly as big as a small elephant. These beasts have terrible eyesight, but they have a fantastic sense of smell and hearing." Vishwadyumna nodded at Kartik, impressed. "What do you propose, my lord?" The rhinoceros was a tricky beast to hunt. They were quiet animals who kept to themselves, but if threatened, they could charge wildly. Few could survive a direct blow from their massive body and terrifying horn. Kartik reached over his shoulder and drew out the 2 swords sheathed on his back. In his left hand was a short twin blade, like the one his elder brother Ganesh favored. In his right was a heavier one with a curved blade, which was certainly not appropriate for thrusting. This weapon was perfect for swinging and slashing, a style of fighting Kartik excelled at. Kartik spoke softly. "Fire arrows at its back. Make as much noise as you can. I want you to drive it forward." Vishwadyumna's eyes filled with terror. "That is not wise, my lord. This animal is huge. Too many soldiers charging in will cramp us. All it would need to do is swing its mighty horn and it would cause several casualties. But we can fire arrows to kill it from a distance." Kartik raised his eyebrows. "Vishwadyumna, you should know better. Do you really think our arrows can actually penetrate deep enough to cause serious damage? It's not the arrows, but the noise that you will create, which will make it charge." Vishwadyumna continued to stare, still unsure. "Also, it is standing upwind, and your positioning behind it would be perfect. Along with the noise, the stench of your soldiers will also drive the animal forward." "It's a good thing they haven't bathed in 2 days," said Kartik, without any hint of a smile at the joke. Like all warriors, Vishwadyumna admired humor in the face of danger. But he checked his smile, not sure if Kartik was joking. "What will you do, my lord?" Kartik whispered. "I'll kill the beast." Saying this, Kartik slowly edged forward, right onto the path that the bull would charge on when attacked by Vishwadyumna's soldiers. The soldiers, meanwhile, moved upwind, behind the rhinoceros. Having reached his position, Kartik whistled softly. "Now!" shouted Vishwadyumna. A volley of arrows attacked the animal as the soldiers began to scream loudly. The rhinoceros raised its head, ears twitching as the arrows bounced harmlessly off its skin. As the soldiers drew closer, some of the missiles managed to penetrate enough to agitate the beast. The animal snorted mightily and stomped the dirt, radiating strength and power as light gleamed off its tiny black eyes. It lowered its head and charged, its feet thundering against the ground. Kartik was in position. The beast only had side vision and could not see straight ahead. Therefore, it was no surprise that it crashed into an overhanging branch in its path, which made it change its direction slightly. At which point, it saw Kartik standing to its right. The furious rhinoceros bellowed loudly, changed course back to the original path, and charged straight towards the diminutive son of Shiva. Kartik remained stationary and calm, with his eyes focused on the beast. His breathing was regular and deep. He knew that the rhinoceros couldn't see him since he stood straight ahead. The animal was running, guided by the memory of where it had seen Kartik last. Vishwadyumna fired arrows into the animal rapidly, hoping to slow it down. But the thick hide of the beast ensured that the arrows did not make too much of a difference. It was running straight towards Kartik. Yet Kartik didn't move or flinch. Vishwadyumna could see the boy warrior holding his swords lightly. That was completely wrong for a stabbing action, where the blade needs to be firmly held. The weapon would fall out of his hands the moment he thrust forward. Just when it appeared that he was about to be trampled underfoot, Kartik bent low and with lightning speed rolled towards the left. As the rhinoceros continued running, he slashed out, his left sword first, pressing the lever on the hilt as he swung. One of the twin blades extended out of the other, slicing through the front thigh of the beast, cutting through muscles and veins. As blood spurted rapidly, the animal's injured leg collapsed from under it, and it grunted confused, trying to put weight on the appendage, now flopping uselessly against its belly. Admirably, it still continued its charge, its 3 good legs heaving against its bulk as it struggled to turn and face its attacker. Kartik ran forward, following the movement of the animal, now circling in from behind the beast. He hacked brutally with his right hand, which held the killer curved sword. The blade sliced through the thigh of the hind leg, cutting down to the bone with its deep curvature and broad metal. With both its right legs incapacitated, the rhinoceros collapsed to the ground, rolling sideways as it tried to stand with only 2 good legs, writhing in pain. Its blood mixed with the dusty earth to make a dark red-brown mud that smeared across its body as it flailed against the ground, panting in fear. Kartik stood quietly at a short distance, watching the animal in its final throes. Vishwadyumna watched from behind, his mouth agape. He had never seen an animal brought down with such skill and speed. Kartik approached the rhinoceros calmly. Even though immobilized, the beast reared its head menacingly at him, grunting and whining in a high-pitched squeal. Kartik maintained a safe distance as the other soldiers rapidly ran up to him. The son of the Nilkanth bowed low to the animal. "Forgive me, magnificent beast. I'm only doing my duty. I will finish this soon." Suddenly, Kartik moved forward and stabbed hard, right through the folds of the rhinoceros' skin, plunging deep into the beast's heart, feeling the shudder go through its body, until at last it was still. "My lord, a bird courier has just arrived with a message for your eyes only," said Kanakala, the Meluhan prime minister. "That's why I brought it personally." Daksha occupied his private chambers, a worried Virini seated beside him. He took the letter from Kanakala and dismissed her. With a polite namaste towards her emperor and empress, Kanakala turned to leave. Glancing back, she glimpsed a rare intimate moment between them as they held each other's hands. The last few months had inured her to the strange goings-on in Meluha. Daksha's past betrayal of Sati during her first pregnancy had shocked her enormously. Kanakala had lost all respect for her emperor. She continued with her job because she remained loyal to Meluha. She had even stopped questioning the strange orders from her lord, like the one he'd given the previous day about making arrangements for Brigu and Dilipa to travel to the ruins of Mount Mandar. She could understand Maharishi Brigu's interest in going there. But what earthly reason could there be for the Swadweepan emperor to go as well? Kanakala saw Daksha letting go of Virini's hand and breaking the seal of the letter as she shut the door quietly behind her. Daksha began to cry. Virini immediately reached over and snatched the letter from him. As she read through it quickly, Virini let out a deep sigh of relief as tears escaped from her eyes. She's safe. They're all safe. On the surface, the plan to assassinate the Nilkanth worked towards the unique interests of all the 3 main conspirators, Maharishi Brigu, Emperor Daksha, and Emperor Dilipa. For Brigu, the greatest gain would be that the Somras would not be targeted by the Nilkanth. The faith of the people in the legend of the Nilkanth was strong. If the Nilkanth declared that the Somras was evil and decided to toe the Naga line, so would his followers. For Dilipa, it meant the killing of 2 birds with a single stone. Not only would he continue to receive the elixir from Brigu, but he'd also do away with Bhagirath, his heir and greatest threat. Daksha would be rid of the troublesome Nilkanth and be able to blame all ills on the Nagas once again. The plan was perfect, except that Daksha could not countenance the killing of his daughter. He was willing to put everything on the line to ensure that Sati was left unharmed. Brigu and Dilipa had hoped that with the rupture in relations between Daksha and his daughter, the Meluhan emperor would support this mission wholeheartedly. They were wrong. Daksha's love for Sati was deeper than his hatred for Shiva. Upon Virini's advice, Daksha had sent the Arishtanini brigadier Mayashranik, known for his blind loyalty to Meluha and deep devotion to the Nilkanth, on a secret mission. Mayashranik was to accompany the 5 ships that had been sent to attack the Nilkanth's convoy. Virini had covertly kept in touch with her daughter Kali through all these years of strife, and had made Daksha aware of the river warning and defense system of the Nagas. All that had to be done was to get the alarm triggered in time. Mayashranik's mission was to ensure that the alarms went off. He was to escape and return to Meluha after that. The Arishthanami brigadier and acting general of the Meluhan army had carried a homing pigeon with him to deliver the news of the subsequent battle to Daksha. The happy message for the Meluhan emperor was that the progeny Daksha cared for, Sati and Kartik, were alive and safe. Virini looked at her husband. If only you would listen to me a bit more. Daksha breathed deeply. If Lord Brigu ever finds out? Would you rather your children were dead? Daksha sighed. He would do anything to ensure Sati's safety. He shook his head. No. Then thank the Paramatma that our plan worked, and never breathe a word of this to anyone. Ever. Daksha nodded. He took the letter from Virini and set it aflame, holding it by the edge for as long as possible to ensure that every part of it had charred beyond recognition.